Um,
So you should be good.
the arrows.
Yeah, and you click off the slide to select.
Once I start that, I should be okay. Okay, let me first, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Mike Wedell. I'm the vice president of the Muscatine County Genealogical Society. Just give you a brief outline. I've been doing genealogy since my early 20s. Actually got pulled into German research right away. First, I got kind of pulled into Norwegian. I actually got pulled in by my girlfriend at that time, which was now my wife. But her father was an only child. Mom died when he was quite young. Dad also died when he was young. And he was, like I said, only child. He had no idea who his genealogy was. So it's like, and he got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And it's like, okay, we got a clock ticking. Let's see if we can figure this stuff out. So, we did find out quite a bit. We were able to get all his lines back to Norway. And did find out, he had a bunch of cousins that we were able to make some contact with. But after his passing is then my wife's aunt, her mother's sister, came and said, well, who's going to do our German lines? Because she's 100% German. And that's really how I got into it. And to make kind of a long story short is that, we were incenting both each other. I wanted just, learn it because my parents have been doing genealogy since I was a young kid. And to be honest, I hated genealogy when I was a kid. It was, my parents dragged us to all the cemeteries. They would, okay, who's going to get $1 if you can find this name on this tombstone? You look at, it's hundreds of acres here. Where, so it's, for me, but, I did not like it, but for me, it was the challenge. And I'm about to kind of talk about what hooked me. And my Aunt Esther was like, if you can find Frank Geinitz in Germany, I will visit where he grew up. And we actually shook on it, by the way. So I shook, I said, bet. But we still were working together. And in a small county courthouse in Illinois was the breakthrough. There was a letter because he was a minor when he wanted to get married here in the United States. We'll just say, got the milkmaid pregnant, is how it was described in the family lore. And he was a disgrace to the family, and he came to America. Well, in this little courthouse, he had to get permission from his father, and there was a letter still from the 1870s sitting in a courthouse, all in German, and the key was in the upper right-hand corner was the word Vogelgesang, bird song in German. And we knew they were near Weimar, and from that, I was able to go to a family history center, and we had been working on it for a year just to go, how do we make the jump? How do we jump the pond? And from that one word, I was looking through some microfilm, and I had some help from the Family History Center. And they said, here's what you want to look for. And I remember we knew roughly his birth date, and then I found it, exactly what we were looking for. And unbeknownst, my emotions took over, and I literally exclaimed quite loud, I finally found you, you son of a. And from that alone, I was hooked. And it was like, how do I get over? How do I dig deeper? And today, for those who are just starting out, back then, it was a fraction amount of availability of information that you have today. Thousands of pages are getting added every day to the Genealogical Society sites in Germany, which is making it easier. And even the United States records more and more becoming digitalized. You may not find it initially. It may take some work, but the information's out there. It's just trying to be creative on how do you get to it. Okay. Oop. So let's just kind of talk why German. Part of it is, where do we live? We're in the Midwest, which is heavily German. So that's one of the reasons, you'll see a lot more German research, a lot more German resources, is that the upper Midwest was heavily was heavily immigrated by the Germans, especially in from the 1820s to the 1880s. Now, first of all, roughly, according to the US Census, roughly 40 million Americans do claim some German ancestry. The first German settlement was in Germantown. I actually have ancestors that were in Germantown. I could tell you how they ripped off William Penn, but that would be another story. But a couple went to jail, but they were creative Germans. We'll just put it that way. And if the name is Custer, so if we have any Custers in here, you might have known some of my aunt's cousins. General George Armstrong Custer. His brother was a two-time Medal of Honor winner, one of the few that have won the Medal of Honor twice in military. So there's a lot of information on Germantown in near Philadelphia. Again, biggest immigration came in the 1820s and 1880s. Part of it was, you'll see a huge surge in the late 1840s. Does anyone have an idea what happened in the late 1840s? That's one of them. We're going to also talk what was one of the major drivers of the revolution. Well, they hated the kings. Think of food. Think from a food stand. The famine, the potato famine. People think it's Irish. It was also big chunks of Germany. My ancestors from Bavaria all came during the 1840s. It was not as bad for them because they weren't, we won't go into the history of what the Brits did to the Irish, but a lot of it was that they were poverty. There was a lot of opportunities, and the Germans were really encouraging a lot of folks to, yeah, get out of here. You're just not worth the hassle anymore. And again, that's the political turmoil, that we just discussed. And a lot of them came to the Midwest. Why the Midwest? Very similar climate, culture, and understanding that they were used to in Germany. And also, people always talk about today, oh, chain migration's our big scourge. Thank God we had chain migration even back then, because that will be one of your saviors on how you find your family, because they came in packs. They came, and entire villages would come, entire families would come. You might see one, but then a bunch more would come, and that's going to be part of your key. You may not have the information on your direct ancestor, but keep in mind, a lot of times they came with cousins, neighbors, and other family members. And that's going to be sometimes, and I've found multiple times in my own situation, that's how I was able to discover the opening. Yep. Well, and that's exactly it. Land was unavailable to them for most of the Germans. The land had been coming, and that's how mine came over. My Schaefer and Mueller line settled in Dane, Wisconsin, Dane County, Wisconsin, where Madison is. And that 160 acres was a sweetheart of a deal. So think of it in today's terms. Those are $1 million transactions those folks got in today's dollars. They got 160 acres, working for a few years, bring it up to speed, and it was theirs. So think of it as that the US government in today's dollars said, you come to the United States to get you started and to add to our society, we're basically giving you $1 million. And again, the German newcomers, a lot of it you'll see, like I will talk a little bit here about Cassville, Wisconsin. My wife's ancestry is from Cassville, Wisconsin, which is down on the river up by Grant County, Wisconsin. Literally almost any of the ones at the St. Charles Parish Church are from Germany, and they're almost all from the same villages, all within 2 or 3 miles of each other. So that's the other thing, is you may not find your information right away, but look around, especially if you can find manifests. You see similar names that would have settled in that area too. That might be where you can break through. One of the reasons I have this is we have 16 German states. Now, I'm not going to talk about Eastern Prussia, which is really part of Poland, or Alsace-Lorraine, which is really now part of France. We're looking at just modern Germany here. So you have 13 major states, and then there's city states. So the city states would be Berlin, Hamburg, and Bremen, a little tongue-tied. Why I want you to be focused on this is a lot of the records, we don't have the opportunities here in our records where we have a nice clean census over a state or part of a country. That does not exist in Germany. You will find isolated census records that can sometimes help, but generally speaking, they don't exist. So you need this information to really understand, if you see that, okay, to start focusing in which state eventually you'll need to work at. And it's a very, very fractured society over there, over the generations or over the eons and the centuries, just because parts would be pulled in, it's broken apart, depending on what happens in the different wars that they would experience. So I kind of touched on what's, the German records versus the American research. American is, I'll be honest, there's some real benefits, is that, there's a lot of opportunities in trying to find records here than in Europe in general. Our census records are unbelievable. I mean, you really look at it, yes, you may have had the head of household from 1790 to 1840, but at least you have a family member or a grandfather or an uncle that you can kind of sometimes look at. In 1850, you get the per name census record, so it has all the people. Nothing like that exists in Germany. And remember, we talked about when did the Germans immigrate? Between that period when we started seeing census records that are listing everyone. Well, that doesn't exist in Germany, so you really have to kind of get a little bit more creative. Here, the other thing is we have, municipal records that are kind of okay, in the United States. So some of the vital records, you'll see sometimes the marriages, births. It's not great. If you can find the church, that's good. Again, probate and land records can actually add additional insights. But German, you got to get back to the parish. The parish has everything. The parish will have the baptisms, the marriages, and the deaths. And those, once you can get the parish, you remember, today we have, I'm from the Twin Cities, grew up in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm sure there's other people in here that grew up 30 miles away, 40 miles away, a couple of, hours away. If you go back in that time frame, people were not as wealthy as they are today. Transportation networks didn't exist like they are today. So there was a study done by MyHeritage, the website, and they basically found that everyone within a 4 to 6 mile area, that's where they were born, they married, and they died. Just because if you're dating someone, how far can you walk in an hour or two? How far could you ride a horse in an hour or two? And that was your limited, pool of people. The other thing you'll find out, most people married at least a fourth cousin. So you're going to have a lot of, let's just say the trees sometimes don't have as many branches going up, but you will see a lot more, being all within the same family. The biggest problem you might see, if you can find the parish, you see a lot of similar names all marrying each other. And again, they stayed there for generations. Again, people just did not move. They basically stayed put. The other thing is they started registering civilly or civil records. Sometimes that can be a benefit. Should have brought up a glass of water. Where do we start? Research starts at home. The key is that you really want to start looking at everything you can have. So if some of these lists, if you don't have that information, that's when you're going to have to dive into. Again, the records for the immigration records if you do find the manifest, they may just say the country. Sometimes you get lucky, but that's why you really want to look at those, because you really want to start focusing in where did they come in, which port, when did they come in, so you can find those other family members. So again, people think, oh, everybody came in through New York. Not the case. You're going to see records that come in through Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Orleans, and Canada. I think I have all these except for New Orleans. All mine came in through different records, those different ports. Again, you want to make sure you find, when you get your citizenship papers in the United States, you have your first papers and you have your second papers. Each jurisdiction might have a little difference. Oh, you're saying, thank you. So each jurisdiction you might get additional information where they came out of, and you're really going to have to get down to the village to really make a difference. But again, you need to start examining everything. The one that you can really is look at your family members. If they came over with siblings, if you strike out on your ancestor, if it's, look for brothers, look for sisters, you'll see in obituaries that was survived by this cousin, survived by this sibling. The parents had these children. Those are the ones that sometimes you have to expand your research. You cannot be looking at just, I'm looking for my family and my family only. Because countless times, my ancestor, I could not find what I was looking for, but I found it in the sibling. They may have lived longer, and the obituary or 50th wedding anniversary is much more detailed. And they'll say, the 50th anniversary, the sibling had, came from this specific village, and that would have been given by that person most likely to the newspaper, where you start seeing villages listed by the descendants, a child or a grandchild, spelling gets unique and not always accurate, or they'll may identify just the major city nearby. Granted, you're getting closer, but a lot of it is, you really have to expand your research and look at all the other people. Again, newspapers is one that I probably have found my biggest breakthroughs on. And there's some of those have paid subscriptions. So I hate saying it, depending how aggressive you want to be, sometimes you might have to get a short-term newspaper subscription or travel to a site, to the Family Research Center. Some of the ones around here have some subscriptions that can be a benefit, but those are things you really want to look at. Is the newspapers can be unbelievable, especially if you have a wide idea of who the family members are and when they live. The other thing is, I want to make sure we touch on people well, I'm only going to look at the English newspapers. A lot of these bigger cities, well, you'll see the native language newspapers. And if you're doing some of these newspaper archives or newspapers.com, they will actually show you the name, and Google Translate's wonderful, where you can just copy it from the German and it will give you a pretty good translation of what happened in English. I have found one where I couldn't figure it out in the American newspapers, but the village was in the German newspapers of the local one. Again, be aggressive. The one thing I've learned is that people give up too easily. So if you have a church record, my wife going back to Cassville, there used to be a priest when years and years ago said, hey, can I look at your baptism records, your marriage records? And the answer was, no way. You will not be allowed here. I had to wait 15 years until he died. Then I asked the next priest, and he was like, yeah, come on in. Well, if somebody help you out, we'll give you the books. So be diligent. Churches are amazing resources. No guarantees again, but you really don't want to leave stones unturned. Everything you need to really look at. Cemetery records. Sometimes talk to the sexton. I hear they have great records, right? But again, you'll be surprised on what some might not be in your ancestor, but if you look at the record of a sibling, that might be where you find the village that they came from, especially parents. Again, we kind of talked about the FAN method, family, associates, and neighbors. Who's around them? Look at the manifest. A lot of times you look at the manifest, they'll say they're all going to Cassville, Wisconsin. Okay, that's where you want to start documenting, because if they're all going to Cassville, you may get strikeout on all your family members. Then you start looking at some of the other neighbors that may have come with them. And most likely they came in groups. Again, that chain migration can be a huge benefit on when you're trying to find your ancestors. Again, you really want to look at every census. Not just find the census record, but read the census record. On 3 of my wife's lines, they actually, for whatever reason, the enumerator didn't follow the rules and actually wrote the village they came. So it's one that and then when you look at a census record, who looks at every column? Because the columns will tell you, are they naturalized? Are they in the process of being naturalized? When did they get naturalized? Because this is all going back to those first and second records. When did they immigrate? So and again, you want to make sure you document it for the ones, the 1910, 1900, 1920. You will see slight differences, but again, it's how do you narrow down your variables that you'll eventually have to research. Military pensions. Again, this is one that I have found some amazing things, especially the Civil War ones. A lot of people came, again, we talked about that 1840s, 1850s. For whatever reason, they tried to avoid the Franco-Prussian War and landed straight into the American Civil War. And they were Americans now, so they're going to fight. If they joined the Union, especially, and my ancestors did, they were with the Wisconsin and Minnesota. The records are amazing, these pension records. They actually talk about, here's their children, and they actually put the exact villages that they were born in Europe. So those are ones that you can look at. Our pension records, if you have to go to that point, no guarantee, and I think they're over $100 each now to buy them from the U.S. National Archives. So again, nothing is free. If you want to go free, it might just extend your research time. But sometimes if it's one that you hope, or if you ever got into DC, you can go to the National Archives. I was too cheap. I went to the National Archives on a business trip and looked them up on an extra day I spent there. Again, family photos can be an interesting one. If you get those old cabinet types, sometimes if they came a little later, you might see the German villages, or you might see something on the back of the photo. So again, don't leave anything unturned. Yeah.
And the students had.
Yep.
Listen to me. But they're called Latin partners because but they joined me and I because one of the things that the reason was a lot of our Jewish ancestors basically almost founded by their self-esteem. And they were poor and had no opportunities whatsoever. And these students were fighting against that. They identified it. And so fighting the war to free the state was for them a continuation of it.
Yep. I had a podcast. I listened to a couple podcasts, and they talked exactly about some of those type of things about why did our ancestors come to the United States, and that was one they talked about the Germans coming over here. And you will see that in some of the records that I have found, and the aristocracy, they weren't nice folk. Because I have one where the parish minister was pretty harsh on the local nobility. He had like the flu, or he had some kind of illness, but the aristocracy insisted that he cleaned his sheep in the local stream in the springtime. He died in March, and he got sick and died. So the record that was given in Germany, very gossipy, by the way. If you can find them, they're awesome. But you will find a lot of information of family stories that were probably lost 200 years ago, and then you were able to find those type of things. But you will find out more once you can find those records into Germany about what these people actually had to go through, and it was not an easy life.
And we give a choice of fathers and children in the country. So they're lucky there.
So Google is one that I've found, don't be shy in using Google, and just type in the question you have. How do I find Germans that came in the 1870s into Iowa? How do I find records from Bavaria? I mean, put them specific, put them broad, but sometimes you'll find some amazing things that will enable you to make some additional steps. County histories. Now, granted, they are not official, but a lot of county histories were written probably from the 1880s, typically to the early 1900s, 1910, 1920. Examine everything you can at the local county. A lot of those are on Google Books, and those are free because they're no longer copyrighted. So look for those type of things. County histories can have some amazing amount of information in them. There's German immigration databases. This is one I'm giving just in the Bavarian, and this was could not find anything out of my Bavarian ancestors. And then I made a query in Google, like, and I think it was something like, why are Bavarian immigrants so tough to find? Something like that. And there was a California Genealogical Society that had been compiling Bavarian newspaper notices. In Bavaria, you could not get a passport for you and your family until you had posted a notice in the local paper saying, I want to make sure if I owe you money, here's your chance to collect before I vamoose, and you can't collect anything. So they wanted to make sure that everybody got paid before you could get your passport. So you had to put this notice in there. And that notice alone opened up 4 lines that I had no idea that, and that to this day, I don't know if I had still been able to find those records. But again, if you got Bavarian ancestry, this thing is awesome because it literally has everything, talks the village they came from, is it coming as a family, the period they're coming in, and from that was enough for me. And these were families that were different. Schaefer, which means shepherd, and Miller, it's like Smith and Jones back in Germany. But I had enough information where we thought they came from, and that was enough for me to open up that information. My wife's from the Rhineland. Her ancestor is from like Leverkusen up by Cologne. So one of the things that was amazing in those records is, again, how do I find, I had a cousin who had a passport from the Rhineland. And I'm like, he says, yeah, I found it online. Where'd you find it? Well, actually, my uncle found it online. I don't know where he found it, but I'm going, okay, maybe there's something out there. I said, Rhineland passports. There's an entire database of the Rhineland that shows all the families that came over, where the passport application is set, telling them they're going to, who's are going with them. And then you can actually now get it's the application, not the form that they would have been given, but the entire application. And they're all in German, and you can order them, and they'll send you a really great scan of who's coming and where they're coming from. So it's one that, you know, and I'm just giving you ones for my specific states. Everybody's different because they all had different rules, but those are be creative, ask for different things, ask for help. That's the other thing I want to make sure. The one thing is, a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to sound stupid. I don't want to sound inexperienced. The ones that are stupid are the ones not asking the questions. If you have a person that's like, hey, can we swap research? I feel like I'm hitting a roadblock, having a new set of lens. And that's when I would recommend for genealogy societies. Okay, where do I have a brick wall? I got a brick wall, you got a brick wall. Can we swap them? And just a new lens, a new viewpoint, new way of looking things can really make a world of difference. Another one, you know, there's a lot of immigration records. There's one at German roots, you know, there's one that I kind of detailed here. And always ask for help. There's a website called CompGen. It's out of Germany. Granted, a lot of the dialogue is in German, but it's easy to hit translate on if you're using Google or Chrome to see what the words are saying. Amazing, a lot of them speak English. And if you put a query out there, I'm trying to find my way over. I've been able to get some great information. In one case, actually helped me find one of my ancestors. So don't be shy. It's okay to ask. Okay, let's talk about websites that I have found to be phenomenal. The first one is the Myers Gazetteer. When I first started, it was on a microfilm. It was a pain to use. You had to go to the Family History Center in your local one nearby. I think we have one in Iowa City and one in the Quad Cities in Davenport that you can use. It's now automated. It's all online. You can, if you have a village and you're going, well, I have an obituary that says this, but I can't, where is that? You can put in permutations of the spelling. It will tell you, it'll show you the specifics of that village. It'll tell you where the records are stored, which Catholic, Jewish, or Protestant records are nearby. It'll tell you the size of the village. I mean, it has an amazing amount of information. But if you're trying to find where they came from, you can't do it without this app, this Myers Gazetteer. Jane, I know I used it in your case, and I know I used it in the Eckstein case. And when I helped you guys do your research, because we were trying to find your Schleswig-Holstein, you were Schleswig-Holstein, I think too. So it's like, using this was a huge one because I had records here in the United States. And I'm like, well, where are they from? And how the kids may have put the record in the obituary was kind of close. This will help you go, okay, I need to look for these 3 villages in this area because they all look like that would be the village we need to find. The one site, it does cost, there is a subscription, but you can get various subscription time lengths, you know, from a month, from 3 months to 6 months to a year. They limit how many records you can actually get with a subscription. I usually don't use up my allocation as Archeon. So if you have Lutheran ancestry, unbelievable, because this is something that even 10 years ago, unless you went to Germany and went to the parishes, you could not get this information. They are adding literally thousands of pages a day. I have a couple parishes I'm still waiting to be added, but they probably have all the Lutheran parishes in Germany probably have 70% already online. And again, they're adding thousands of pages every day, 7 days a week. But this one's amazing. It has, once you find the parish, you're going back to the 1600s, virtually on every line, because they're so detailed and they're so descriptive. If you have Catholic lines, this is another one. This one's for free, but unfortunately, they're slowly building it out, is Matricula. And it's one that, you know, here's the thing, it's all in English, or at least the guide to find it. The records are all going to be in German, but if you're Catholic, that's the Catholic one that they're building out, very similar to Archeon. But again, it's being funded by the European Union. It's taking a little slower, but it's one that you want to watch periodically. Family search. All of us, I'm sure, have that as their favorite or one of their favorites at their home computer. Again, German wiki. If you've never used the family search wikis, you're missing a huge opportunity to really learn about that specific area. The wikis will give you websites that you can go look at, will help explain that territory, that state, that village. So you always want to look at the wikis. The catalog is actually the records they have for that particular town, village, or state that you could go look at a microfilm. Well, it's not really microfilm, it's all digitalized, but you would have to go to a family research center to look that up. And I'm sure Ancestry, another subscription that you have to pay. A lot of this is they're slowly are growing. They're European records. From my perspective, Ancestry is much more American centric, but they are expanding their European opportunities for collections. If you're trying to find families, I would definitely, or cousins that are, long lost cousins. My heritage is much more European centric. Their family trees are much more tied to the old country than to the American records on Ancestry. If you have DNA, you can have a DNA sample from Ancestry and for free, upload it to My History, which will give you higher probability for finding those cousins. Finding those cousins, why do I care? They probably have the stuff you need. So it's one that looking at those family members, if you find a cousin that's a third or fourth cousin, you may not have a clue how you're related, but having a correspondence with that saying, here's my ancestor, they may have the information you're looking for. So it's one that, again, My Heritage, it's a subscription. I think it's a little cheaper than Ancestry, but definitely much more European centric. Kartenmeister, as we had talked about, the borders change, village names change. This can be important if you're trying to find a village, because the thing that people will look at will say, well, what was it like? I got a record that's, somebody says Berlin, or they put another modern name from somebody else. These names have changed. And you might want to be aware of what was the name when your ancestor came in 1850. It could be very different than some name that a family member had some correspondent and obituary, and they're using the modern name. So it's one that you want to kind of be aware of. CompGen, this is one that's for the kind of like their chat groups, can be hugely helpful. They also have a lot of data information. I remember going back to my wife's Rhineland ancestors, all of a sudden I knew that they were from a little village called Romanskirchen. I'm probably mispronouncing it again. And all of a sudden I found that they had digitalized high scan copies going back to the 1790s when Napoleon was running the show on that side of the Rhineland, not the Prussians. All the records were in French, but it was ones that they were Catholic records and municipal records. A lot of them were in French, some were in Latin. But they had an index and had the family name. So, and again, gets weird. Frank is American, Franz would be German, Francois would be French. And I saw that name used in all different ways. And then GeoGen, if you have weird names in your German head, like Schwinghammer or, Getterts or Geinitz or, Eckstein, I don't know. This one's kind of nice that you can plug in your names and it'll color code kind of where that name is typically found. And if you put in Mueller, sad to say, it's going to be everywhere. But if you have unique names, again, it's trying to narrow down your research. Now, if you're really good, I should probably have you pronounce this better than I can. The family history books, the town lineage books, a lot of these villages, if you can find the village and you're lucky enough to have one of these family history books, it will basically spell out all your genealogy. And I don't know if there's Norwegians in here, but as a Norwegian, they have something, correct my pronunciation, I always call them Bidjibak. Okay, but those books, you can actually, it shows exactly the same thing. Once you find the family farm, you literally go back on every line back to the 1600s. And it's all spelled out for you. I mean, just like, here's their kids, here's who they married. These things can be hugely great. There is a website you can look to see, if you do start thinking, hey, that might be it, that might be a resource to look at. Okay, now we're going to talk about who here likes to look at Ancestry and see if they can find their family. Okay, let's be honest. Come on, every hand should be up here. Okay. Be very careful using other people's research. I'm going to talk about how I corrupted Ancestry with bad research. So when I first started working on our Schaefer line, I had an old death certificate. And I was trying to find, Johann was the immigrant that came to Dane County, Wisconsin. And I could make out his dad, another Johann Schaefer. And then the mom's name looks like Denz Kerr. Okay, I'll go with it. You know, I don't have anything better than Denz Kerr. So I go with that and I put my tree up in Ancestry, and I'm still trying to find those Bavarian records. Then that one California Genealogy Society had those records for the newspapers. Bingo. Oh, the other thing, this line, the family put Weisenberg as the village that he came from. Well, I looked at Weisenberg, but I can't find him. But then I get the newspaper, Weisenbach was the village that was listed. I go to Weisenbach, the world opens up, going back generations, many generations. Beauty of having those records, I actually find out whose Des Kerr's real name was. Margaret Beinmuller. And you're going, how do you have Des Kerr with Margaret Beinmuller? I said, well, I got to figure out what I made a mistake. So I get another scan. This time, you know, this was a copy off of Xerox. It was sent with curly paper and all that stuff. And then it goes, doesn't know. So all of a sudden I'm like, well, God, I've had that record out there for 10 years. Who do I need to help fix their record? 86 trees, 85 trees had Des Kerr as the wife, and some miraculously were able to extend Des Kerr back multiple more generations. So it's, I to this day, when I still check it every few months to say, is Des Kerr still hanging out there? And I find something, it's like, it's not Des Kerr, it's Margaret. You know, I got all the records, but take it off, because I felt really guilty for corrupting lots and lots of trees. So that's my lesson, is that I screwed up 86 family trees out there. And if I messed up that many, how much other bad information do people rely on that could really make their life miserable by going down tracks? And then when you finally figure out what the real answer is, because I can tell you the ones that had Des Kerr going back another 2 or 3 generations, it's like, how did they move from Bavaria to, you know, Schleswig-Holstein? And this one's down in, you know, Hesse. And it's like, this one's, it's like, they just found names that look right, and they just started adding on to it, because that's how you get genealogy. So let's just make things up. No, that's wrong, by the way. So this is kind of going out again. Let's watch out for bad research. I kind of touched on that My Heritage study, and it's by finding that village. If you start seeing research, especially on Ancestry or Family Search, and you see people being married to each other and their kids are born one spot, and 50 miles away is the dad and 40 miles is the wife, be very suspect. Most people born, married, and died within a 6-mile radius of where they were born. So if you see information coming all over the board, your little antenna should be going up saying something's not right. So again, finding where the parents born nearby. If not, you're really gonna have to make sure you do additional research or understand that person's family tree, because people, when you've been spending years trying to find someone and you see a nice family tree and it looks like it's all spelled out, go with my own. It's very tempting, especially for new genealogists. Don't do it, because you may expand this and pass it to everyone else, and then at some point you're going to find out, ooh, I made a mistake here. So double check, triple check, be diligent about looking for your information. Again, I am very open about emailing other people and saying, show me your research. And I'll be honest, I bet 50% of the time, if not higher, when I send an email to somebody, and I usually pretty PC about, like, I have photos, I have documents, would you be willing to share information with me? And those I usually can get a response. So that's how I respond, is I want to share what I have with you. A lot of times I get a better response. And then I ask, hey, how did you get your information? When they say, my Aunt Esther gave it to me, antennas go up. Well, where did she get it? I have no idea, but Esther would never lie. So those are the ones that you really want to be careful with, that if you gave it information, look for the support. I know in our class, for those who have taken our class, we hammer on all the time. get your support, get your documentation, organize it, know who, where, what, and when, and how you got that information. The other thing is, one thing I get kind of frustrated with Ancestry, even MyHeritage, people have indexes. So they'll just show the name, 2 names, or just the person's name, and you're going, oh, that's good. Get the information behind the index. Because a lot of times you're going to find out the index, yeah, it looks like yours, but it might be not yours at all. So you really want to make sure if it just says a marriage index, Tom Jones and Jane Doe married each other. Okay, it may be right, but let's get the real record behind it, because there is a real record with probably more information. And a lot of times that index doesn't mention who the witnesses were, where the parents are, or who were their parents, what were the ages of the spouses that got married. That will help, build your case. And I'm not asking you to do the genealogical standard for documentation, but you really want to be able to say, I comfortably feel really good that my information is accurate. And the one thing I know, that if somebody asks me, where do I spend my money? And I know that genealogy can be a very expensive hobby, and you have to pick and choose your resource and how you're going to do it. Probably 90% of my entire costs are tied to translation, because seeing a translation with just names, I can read a little bit of German, tiny, and based, I wouldn't say read it. I can recognize names and places, okay? But the records in Germany most often are not tables. It's a big paragraph. And it's written with a script that's kind of tough to read sometimes. But having that translation, and she's a PhD out of German middle age history or something like that, out of Canada. Phenomenal, very reasonable, she's very efficient. But for me, on records that are really important, especially marriage records, which usually have the spouses, the parents, the names, those are the ones that I will definitely get translated, because they're about 2 pages long, and they go into great detail about the father is deceased, the mother is married to a new person, but his name should have been this. It really can open things up, and they'll talk. This is the 3rd child, the 3rd boy out of the 5 kids, so you can start going, oh, there's other children I might need to look for. So those are the things that, if you don't have that information, you can really limit your ability to do a deeper dive that confirms things. Yes, Jim. Well, when we did yours, what we did is, I'll give an example. So we were working on Jane Dahlfeld's records out of Schleswig-Holstein, and we had a village, and we had names of the husband and wife, and I think we had a couple of things. Yeah, so we had a lot of variables that were going, man, what's the probability we're wrong? It has the name, the first and last name of the spouse, I think we confirmed. The village looked pretty close to the spelling that we had in the American newspaper, I think it was. We had, I think might have been ages or parents, or one of the parents was meant. So you had a lot of variables going, what's the probability that you would have all these things line up and be the wrong family? So we asked Dr. Esther, can you translate this paragraph for us? And then when we got the translation, then it had more information. Okay, she came from this, we came from this. And then we were able to look at some of those other records that gave us a clue. And we said, we got the right person. Because once we knew that they came from this village, okay, let's see if we can find their birthday, which tied to a tombstone, exactly, I think. So we got their birth or their baptism, which had the baptism and the birthday tied, which then tied to the American record to the date. And you're going, it's got to be it. Because we also had some other records we were corroborating at the same time. But for me, if I'm confident that I have I'm not just going to, well, the name kind of has, Johann Mueller, I'm just going to no, you don't want to spend $20 or $15 on a detailed translation and be wrong. So I occasionally do have ones it's a throwaway, but for me, it's how do I I'm looking at the total cost of acquisition of the names and the family names. And if you can find someone that can read German script, God bless you, because I have yet to find any locals that really do it well. And I'm not somebody that can just say, well, I know a couple German words in here. They have to know the vernacular. They really need to know the nuance and how the script is, because the script is kind of like the cursive we learned, but it's a little different. It takes practice to really learn it. Talking about script. Now this is nice. I wish my records looked like this. But again, there's a lot of help out there if you start working on German script. The Family Search has some great wikis. YouTube has some great ideas. If you're looking for names, and that's kind of how I started, is looking going, Franz Geinitz. Okay, I'm looking for Franz Geinitz. And so what does a Franz look like? And what do like G's and N's and I's and T's look like? That's how I first started. They also have, you know, they have ways of getting transcribers. There's a lot of handouts that you can look in Google and just say, give me an alphabet of old German script. And I've got one that, actually, I hate to say it, I have one that's a Swedish script because the script is very similar in style to the German. And I use that one because it has like 5 different versions of a lowercase s, 5 different versions of an uppercase s, because there's different styles and templates over time that they change, and they're not all the same. You have to kind of find the style of that minister or priest, and then you can say, okay, it's good. It's this column over here that I need to look at. Okay, let's talk about parish records. So, you know, I kept talking about, you know, going back to the 1600s. Really, you know, you're not going to, it's highly unlikely unless you have no ability to get back. It's not easy getting back before 1500, 1550. Most times you won't find much prior to 1600, but the, you know, the practice of keeping parish records slowly evolved. They were not, it's just like the American records on birth certificates. Some counties did them, some didn't, some, you know, required at some point. So you'll see hits and misses as you go further back. But the Lutheran churches kind of started around the 1540s, and I would not say that you will find those in all the records. It's kind of a hit or miss. Sometimes it's just the marriage records. The Catholic records were mandated by the Pope in the mid 1500s, but really the big we're going to talk about is the 30 Years' War. And that's one became a big deciding factor. We talk about World War II. You want to see a war, in my opinion, that was probably more devastating than World War II. Go back to that one. That was a no bars whole. I mean, I had family ancestry that moved into a village that if the plague didn't wipe them out, the battles did. And that was really when you started seeing a schism between the Catholics really saying, we are going to have detailed records for births, marriages, and deaths, and you got to do it, priest. Or the Lutheran minister, you got to do it right after that. So that's when you really see the records starting to evolve and getting much better. So what, you know, kind of the significance, 30 Years' War was really it's really a religious conflict, Catholics versus the Lutherans. And it was a holy war. It's just eventually what you can almost call it, a holy war, because if you didn't convert or you weren't the right side, we were going to kill you. So it became pretty brutal over there. And, you know, it's one that it's for me, it was really interesting learning more about it, because I was like, why do all the records? And I had a cousin in Germany that sent me a whole bunch of stuff on the 30 Years' War, why it was really important for the churches and how it kind of set, instead of being you're tied to the church, you know, regardless where you're at, I'm Lutheran or Catholic, it became much more, what nation state are you part of? I am now a Bavarian. I am now, so it was more, they settled the religious side, they became much more affiliated with the area that they lived in, or the area, or the region that they were living in at that point. But again, it became, you know, as I kind of said, it became less about religion and more about, you know, who was going to be in charge. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, it was horrible, horrible. Oh, it would be, they would raise the whole village. I have records on one of my lines, which was kind of interesting. They were from the 1830s or 1630s. And it talked about that everybody was in hiding. So they quickly came out and buried, you know, one of my ancestors. And then everyone scurried back home because they couldn't have the songs. They couldn't go in the church. The church was destroyed. But he was, thank goodness, I think the priest or the minister was like, thank goodness we were able to give him a proper Christian burial, because the wars were occurring very nearby. And if you got caught out in the open, it could be a bad day for you. So again, some key words. Again, when I learned my genealogy, and I'm still struggling with this, is I have cheat sheets. If you came to my home computer, where I have the months and I have tables just like this, just so I can get a rough idea what's going on. The ones that are for me are the essential ones are, you know, baptism, birth, because you'll see records. There'll be, you know, one you'll see that it's a birth or a baptism. It's the same record, but they'll have the headers as different slight. You know, you'll see the first one or I'm gonna mispronounce it because I'm not, again, I don't know German. Gebert or Tolfe or Hauer. Taufe. See, I know you're the German teacher, so I'm intimidated right now. So it's one that, you know, for me has been very helpful to find those key words to really look at it. And you'll get better with script as you work with it more and more. And that's the key, is that don't expect you to just fly through this stuff. It takes a little bit of practice. It takes a little patience. Wiedersehen. Did I do that well? Okay. Is there any questions that people have? And I'm more than willing to, and again, I always put this out to the Muscatine Genealogy Society members. If you're part of the society, I am more than willing to help you out. I have so many subscriptions that, you know, I feel bad that sometimes they kind of sit on the shelf or sit in my computer. So if you have ones that you have questions or how do I break through it, I actually have more fun working on your stuff than mine because mine's a bear now. So it's like,